As we get started, we want to tell you a little bit about our partnership. Shipley Associates has been at the forefront of capture and proposal for more than 50 years. We help top companies win business. We offer training, consulting, and now AI services. And pWin.ai enables teams to write better proposals faster using AI. It's built from the ground up on Shipley best practices to create content that's aligned with how evaluators score. This gives pWin clients a winning edge. Since January, there has been a lot of progress in AI, and today we want to talk to you about the advancements, the trends, good news, and some pitfalls. And since we did our last State of AI Roundup, the models have gotten better at reasoning, doing deep research, and using tools. We see clear patterns among early movers about what works and what doesn't. And today we want to talk through what's changed, what's working, and where we see teams still getting stuck. We'll encourage you to develop and build strong prompting skills, and we'll talk about what's coming next and how expectations around AI are continuing to shift. So, Vishwas, let's jump right in and talk about the technical advancements that are impacting proposal teams.
Yep. Thank you, Amy. Obviously, this is a fast-moving area, and we have seen many advancements since we talked last about this topic. So I'm going to cover some of the highlights of the advancements since January of 2025. And what I'm going to do, Amy, is break down these advancements in the context of what we are here to talk about, which is the overall theme of how can these models help us do better proposal writing. So to break down, in my mind, there are two major improvements. There are tons of small improvements that I'm sure there are lots of articles that people have read about, but in my mind, for what we are here to talk about, there are two key improvements. And then the first improvement is the context size. And let me break that down. Think of this as the memory of the model. Then you provide it an instruction. And Amy, Marty's excellent book that we're all familiar with, we have talked about this in the past. He used the goldfish analogy. Of course, goldfish are known to have a short-term memory, and same is the case as Marty was explaining. These AI models have a short memory. So you give them an instruction, and then next time you give them another instruction, they've forgotten the previous instruction. So how do you deal with them forgetting the instructions that you've provided? Well, if you're asking them for a task, you give them a lot of background information, also known as the context. So let's break it down. You're asking it to write a section in response to a section C requirement. And you're providing it a bunch of background. You're providing it some past performance. Maybe you have some capture information. You have to provide all of that as a context for the model to then take that information and produce some output. Turns out that not in the distant past, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we were limited to 8 or 16K, which means we could only provide a certain size of context. And one of the major areas of improvement that we have seen, Amy, across OpenAI and all of the frontier models is that this size has gone up significantly. So we are talking about 1 million tokens. So to break it down, what does tokens mean? About 750,000 words. So you can imagine you can really upload an entire collection of PDF documents if you had to, all the solicitations, maybe other documents. So you have a much bigger context window to work with. Now, I would caution all of our attendees today that this expansion in context size comes with a bunch of limitations that you have to be aware of. Not all of the information in the context window can be efficiently used by the models. And this has been shown through a number of tests, which we won't get into right now because of lack of time, but people have conducted tests where they have tried to retrieve all parts of the large context size that I was talking about, and the ability to retrieve information across all of this context is quite variable. So keep that in mind. So that's one big improvement. So take advantage of that, but also be mindful of how this information can diminish and not all of that information is equally accessible. That's one major improvement. Amy, the other major improvement, which we have also touched about in our previous webinar, is the ability to reason. Up until now, you went to ChatGPT or Claude or some other model, you give it a prompt and it tried to answer that question instantaneously. Before you know it, just producing reams of text. And now, if you've used the models lately, you know that the models can automatically decide that this is a deeper question and I need to think some more. So there's a thinking time. And Amy, we all like to say that we've been talking about reasoning and thinking for almost 2 years now, because we took an approach where we thought that we needed to think before we produced the model output. So now that these models are doing reasoning, what does that mean to you? So you give it a task, and let's just go back to your example. You're trying to ask it to write a section in response to a requirement that you may have in the solicitation documents. It will now think about it. It will now say, oh, you're asking me to write this. Let me break down this task into a number of instructions. And then let me think about these instructions and then now start executing them. And during the course of those instructions, it might decide that it does not have all of that information it needs, because maybe during the training of this model, this information was not available. Maybe it's a late breaking change or a recent development. So the model can then automatically go out. Let's just take a simple example. It can go out and browse a website and pull in an information in order to complete that task. Again, very important development. We know that if you plan and then you execute a task, it will lead to better results. So no question, these models are producing better results. But one word of caution here again. I talked about how it will break down that instruction that you've provided based on its own reasoning algorithm. Now, your reasoning, so let's say you're trying to, again, going back to our example, you're trying to write a section. Your algorithm for writing that may be different. And Shipley, of course, has a standard about how to write, how to structure your responses. The model's ability to reason in the same manner may be different, so you have to be watchful about that. The other thing I would say is when it goes out and browses a website, you don't have granular control over which website it is browsing. So maybe you're writing about a capability that you have as an organization. It might go out and find a very similar sounding website. Turns out that that may be a competitor website, pulls in that information when you don't want it to do that, right? Because maybe you're trying to ghost that information. So two really good developments, which we can all be excited about, but also a word of caution about understanding what the limitations are and then working around those limitations. Amy?
Yeah, these advances really are exciting. And I love how you just remind us now these models can take in just huge amounts of information. You mentioned PDFs, but they can take in books, reports, full transcripts. And as you say, this really sounds like a game changer, and in many ways it is. But because the models can see more information, doesn't mean they always use it well, because the model still has to choose what to pay attention to, which is where things go wrong. And as you mentioned, the real leap right now is in reasoning, when the AI pauses to think, to plan, to fact check. And even those skills aren't foolproof, as you mentioned, Vishwas, that the quality still really depends on the inputs, the prompts, and how we review and modify the outputs that we get from AI-enabled tools. Since we're recording this in August of 2025, I know the hot topic is GPT-5. Vishwas, can you tell us, help us differentiate between the hype and the reality?
Yeah, so Amy, GPT-5, anybody who's watching this space, anybody who's using ChatGPT, major announcement on August 7th, where OpenAI released GPT-5. And of course, early days, people are voicing their opinions, some good, some concerning opinions. But OpenAI called it their best model to date. And one of the things that they talked about is that GPT-5 can be more of a writing collaborator than ever before, which means you can spar with it, you can collaborate with it when you're writing something. So that's an important thing that they were talking about. The other two things that they also touted as part of their announcement was this model is 45% less likely to introduce factual errors. So we've talked about this, Amy, in the past. You're providing this background information about what your company has done, and now you're writing a draft. How can we be sure that factual errors are not introduced in the drafts that the model is producing? And that has been a concern with the previous models and frankly, across all model families because the nature of this technology. And OpenAI claims that GPT-5 is 45% less likely to do that. The other thing they said was because of the reasoning, because of the ability to plan, uh, it has an ability to stay coherent with an answer a lot longer than the previous models. So those are the two big improvements. Now, I will tell you that some of the frameworks that I talked about, for example, there is a framework out there called long eval, which measures exactly that did the model stay true to what you asked it to do? Results associated with GPT-5 are not yet available. I'm sure they'll become available in due course. But I'll give you a couple of observations, Amy. First, because the additional reasoning, GPT-5 does seem like it is taking twice as longer to respond. So factor that in if you're working with GPT-5. The other thing which is very interesting, Amy, is GPT-5 seems to be a little bit more, there's a personality change. And with GPT-4 tended to agree with you more. You give it something to write. It said, yeah, this looks good, but let me give you 2 or 3 things. And GPT-5 right now seems to be more handoffish. This is what you gave me, this is what it is. So it's a personality difference. And that has been noted quite widely by people who have been using GPT-5 so far. Very interesting, Amy.
Well, for all of us in the proposal world, I guess what does all of this mean? As you mentioned, Vishwas, GPT-5 is a strong writing partner. It's handling complexity better in planning before it writes, so it's delivering cleaner drafts, but it still struggles with those strict requirements that we see, things like formatting, word limits, instructions that are buried deep in an RFP. So now that we've talked about what the models are capable of, let's switch gears and talk about what we see really working for proposal teams. So we're seeing clear patterns of where AI is delivering value to proposal professionals. And some of this is due to the tools being smarter, but it's not just the technology. That the real gains come when teams use AI deliberately and consistency. So we see research as perhaps the easiest place to start, that AI is so good at quickly gathering intelligence on customers, on competitors, on pricing trends. And there's usually not any sensitive data involved in this. So it's low risk and can be high value. Another thing that we see working is proposal reviews and using AI in reviews because it can act like a fast and smart reviewer. AI is really great at comparing content to evaluation criteria and telling us here's where we're in alignment, here is where something is either missing or where things feel off track. And then, earlier in the year, RFP analysis used to be a weak spot for AI, but the newer models are really doing better at that clause by clause analysis, especially when paired with a structured prompt or structured workflow. When we look at, the teams that we see pulling ahead, they have a few things in common. First, their foundations are really strong. So they have clear process, they have defined roles, and they have well-organized content libraries that AI can really build from. The leaders in our market are assigning real champions. So this is people with the time and the authority to lead change, not just explore AI on the side. And here, these don't have to be people that have titles based on seniority. They just need to be people that are interested and eager to stay at the forefront of AI developments and are the type of people that others on your team trust and will look to for guidance and answers. So those are some things we're seeing working. Another thing that are common among some of the teams that are pulling ahead as we, round out August 2025 are the teams that don't wait for everything to be perfect before they get started. They run short pilots, they get insights fairly quickly, and then they start building momentum. The leading teams also have practical governance rules. So they set clear guidelines about how to manage risk, but they're keeping things flexible enough that they allow people and help people use AI responsibly and, frankly, openly. They prioritize training. So they're helping their teams build the skills to use AI well, not just use the tools, but apply them in the context of real world. So the teams we see getting ahead aren't just leaving it to a few team members to watch YouTube videos and learn a few things. They really are prioritizing training and training as a team. So it's not just about access to better technology. It's the way that teams are approaching adoption that makes the difference. Vishwas, what do you think when you're seeing things in our marketplace that are going well?
Amy, you've covered the key points. I may add just a couple of things here. I think building on what you said, that maintaining your content library is very important. And I just wanted to give an example of that, right? People talk about making their past performance documents or library available. It is important to not just have those documents, but also to inspect those documents and see, are there metrics associated with that? Are there proof points hidden as gems inside your past performance summaries? So it's not enough to just have tons and tons of past performance, but have you extracted the proof points? Because if you have the metrics to back up those statements, AI will be able to use it and the writing will be that much more detailed and less superfluous. So that's one example. And maybe the other example I wanted to point out was teams that are winning with AI or having great results with AI. And you said they're not waiting to get started, they want to do quick POCs. But these are also teams that are deeply thinking about, here is our current workflow that we have all optimized for and we used that for years. Are there opportunities to tweak this workflow in order to take better advantage of AI? And here's an example that will resonate with many of our attendees today. So we use a very important artifact called annotated outlines, which is, here's the response outline. Let's just copy and paste the relevant instructions and the requirements into this one comprehensive document. And that document becomes the focal point of any further work on that proposal. Now, as human beings, we are maybe as coworkers, we are gotten used to each other. We know what instructions to give. We have a common understanding of these instructions. So maybe there's an instruction for this evaluation criteria. Go look at this spreadsheet and look at this column and bring back this instruction. We might take some shortcuts because we all have worked together. But as I've said in the past, AI is awesome in many ways, but AI does have a sourcing problem. If you're not deliberately providing the detailed information about what that requirement is or what that evaluation criteria is, chances are that AI is not going to be able to write it as well as with all of those shortened instructions that have worked well in the past because everybody's familiar with them. So it's like getting a new team member, Amy, going back to your example, getting a new team member, but now you must take the time to provide the team member with all the detailed instructions if you want them to contribute at the level that they can contribute at. So, Amy, those are some of the instructions, but one thing that is always a stumbling block when it comes to how effective your efforts are towards AI is security, right? So let's also talk about security. And I'm not just talking about security from an organization's perspective. Of course, all your proposal library content is super important to you, has all of your innovations, your themes, your other important information, and you want to secure it. You don't want some model to just be trained on your recipe of success. That's important. But there's another equivalent important thing to note here. When you're writing against an RFP, it turns out that a large number of these RFPs can have sensitive information associated with them. And at that point, you're not at the liberty to decide where to store this information and where to work with this and what models to use. That's not your choice anymore because the issuing agency is deciding how that information needs to be handled in a secure manner. So, Amy, those are very important considerations. I'm sure you've seen that in your conversations with customers as well.
Yeah, I mean, security comes up in every conversation, and I'm glad that you talk about the, protecting our own data as well as requirements of even just how to handle, any kind of security around our RFPs. We really can't advise people just attending this webinar on what level of risk is appropriate for your company. That really is a decision that gets made at a chief technology officer level, in some cases, even a CEO level. But what we can say is that when companies ban AI altogether or don't provide clear guidance, what we see is a lot of shadow IT taking hold. And when we say shadow IT, what we mean is companies prohibiting the use of AI, but people still using it anyway. And that's not just in our industry. There's a ton of data on that just across business in general. So really, rather than just having these blanket bans on using AI, in my perspective, it's really better to say, here's what's safe, here's how you can use it, and not pretend that people won't use AI if we just put a blanket prohibition in place. So if you want your teams to use AI tools responsibly, I think it's important to be mindful that not every task that you can use AI for involves sensitive data, but some, as Vishwas mentioned, absolutely do, and it's really important to be mindful of those. But tools like ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, they are incredibly useful, and there are tasks that are less risky from a security standpoint. I already mentioned researching, using AI to research publicly available data, summarize content, even brainstorming how to think through something. So, in my perspective, the choice isn't really between choosing innovation and security. It's about making space for both. So Vishwas, I want to hand it back over to you before we leave this topic of security to really be a little bit more specific about certain security features. So I'll
Yeah.
turn it back over to you.
I mean, great wisdom in what you just said, right? You just can't turn a blind eye and think that people will not be using it, because ultimately you don't have to choose between the two: the innovation that is available in AI models and the people and the work that people have to do in a secure manner, right? It's not a choice. So what we have done at pWin.ai, we've talked about this in the past, that we are very much, I think, the right way to use Gen AI is a responsible way of using Gen AI. So what does that mean? What it means is that all of the underlying models, all of the underlying fabric that we use is based on a secure infrastructure, and not just the underlying models in the fabric. And by fabric, I mean storage, network, all of the machines, the computers and compute devices that go in. All of that fabric has to be running on a secure infrastructure, but that does not end there. On top of that, any applications, so in case of pWin, all of the applications that we have written, all of that has to go through a certification that we are handling your data appropriately, whether it is CUI data or FCI data. So these certifications become important, and we are having this conversation, like you said, many times is going to a CIO level conversation where they want to understand, here are the security controls. How's your application all the way down from the application down to the underlying infrastructure level is meeting these security controls? And once you're able to do that, then you know that your data is within the confines of your security enclave, but at the same time, you're taking advantage of the latest and greatest models. So you don't have to choose between one and another if you look for tools that have achieved these security compliance. Amy?
Okay. Well, as people get started, I think the other thing, start with the end in mind. People want to think about, well, how do I measure success? How do I even know if I'm doing the right things? So, Vishwas, as you advise companies, what are the things that you're talking to people about in terms of what to expect in the early days and then in the long term? And what are the things to measure to demonstrate that they're making progress using AI?
Yeah. Amy, as is always the case, when you're embarking on a transformative technology, it is really important to set a baseline about how much are you using it, what is the real work that is done by AI, and which are the initiatives. Like, is it a You talked about having champions. What are the initiatives where AI is getting used? So we think it is very important to establish a baseline. Amy, the other day, you and I were talking, and you were saying that sometimes it's easy to say, oh, this executive summary, it can just take me 4 hours to complete it. But what you may not have considered, and just citing your example, is all of the assembly time that I had to do 4 hours of SharePoint searches, find the right documents, collate them all together. And when I start writing, then I realize that I really would like to have one more example here. Let me go back and search for it. Oh, it turns out I can't use that because that's 5 years old and that will not apply. So we don't count all of that time. So it's really important to establish a baseline and what real work is being done by you and is being done by AI. And without measuring, you really can't figure out what's happening. And the other thing important is once you have a baseline, Amy, really focus in on the outcomes that you're seeking to achieve by adopting AI. Are you seeking to deliver more proposals? Are you seeking to reduce the cost per proposal? Are you wanting to give your teams additional time for polishing? And frankly, that's where I would spend most of my time, where use AI for getting to that draft quickly, but then use all of the insights that you have developed, all the work you have done on the capture to polish it. And that's ultimately going to move the needle on your probability of winning. So it's important to keep the outcomes. It's important to keep in mind what objectives you have for AI and then keep going back to those objectives and tracking them. Don't adopt AI for the sake of adopting AI. Adopt AI for sake of achieving defined objectives. And Amy, if I could just give a couple of examples. We work with customers every day. I see them using the tool, generating the drafts all day long. Just a few examples. So AIS, a well-known system integrator, uh, does a lot of work in the federal contracting space. And I've talked to the team members who use it. On an average, they say it has saved us about 7 to 8 days in a longish process, right? And all of that time goes back to how can we improve the final deliverable. Astrion, another customer, we have put out a case study. They like something, Amy, that you talked about, ability to quickly create the compliance matrix, maybe create outlines. What used to take us hours and days can now be done in minutes. Of course, you still have to evaluate it, still have to validate it, but can somebody create that first outline for me? And then another customer, which we are not at liberty to name them because they did not give us permissions, but they seem to be getting to the draft significantly faster than others. And I tried to look into why they're getting these results as compared to others. It goes back to, Amy, what you're talking about. They've done a lot of work with their knowledge repository. They have tried to optimize the content so that they can get the right information quickly. They've done a lot of capture work. They go after these proposals where they've done a lot of capture work. So when they're doing content planning, doing flight planning, they're able to bring a lot more information together. So those are some of the factors. They seem to be getting a lot more information or a lot more value from the tool. So hopefully this helps. But going back to the basics of this slide, setting up an important baseline is going to be key for you here.
I agree wholeheartedly. You know that I do. I think also knowing where you want to go is so important. When you talk about polishing, I also feel like that not only makes our documents better, but it helps us see what do we need in our knowledge repository that we might not have had in there because we're seeing a gap that AI could have addressed if we had given it better information. You know, I like to caution teams about thinking about those outcomes until they've been using AI successfully for a little while. I'm so excited to hear about the customers that are getting real ROI. But in those early days, there are things that can be measured to assess, are we using the tool? So things like usage reports. Do you see your teams, instead of defaulting to their old behaviors, are they starting to show initiative and default into using the tool that you provide? Can you get some measure of confidence, whether you might do a survey with your team? And, are they starting to do real work using the tools? So some of those things in the early days are the things to measure and pay attention to so that you can get to the outcomes that you want to. So, I love talking about this. We could talk about this probably all day. But, every customer is on a journey. We just don't start at that kind of run or fly space, as our friend Marty Hum would talk about. So, as you're progressing along your journey, your priorities will change. So, if you're early in your adoption journey, so you're just starting out, we've talked about that. What outcomes are you trying to achieve? So really starting with why. So what business outcomes? Do you need to drive down costs of labor? So you're trying to be as efficient with the time that you have. Do you need to win more business? You probably need to do multiple things, but what outcomes are you hoping that AI will help you achieve? The other thing is, don't wait to name your champions. If you're early in your journey, be thinking of those people who are curious, who are credible, who are ready to experiment, and really support them, because they are going to help you bridge that vision that you have of success to the reality of where you are today. If you are in the phase of your journey where you are actively implementing AI solutions, then do tests in safe but realistic settings. So I would discourage people from launching straight into a high pressure live proposal to do their first pilot. Instead, use RFPs that you have that are similar to what your team will be working on, but give your team some space to basically play, to try the tool, to make some mistakes, and to learn without that fear of failure or the fear of burning through too much time on a live engagement. And make sure in these active implementation phases that you're not just training on features, but you're also training on strategy, because these tools change and evolve. And that's a good thing. And what's important is that the users have the ability to think critically, to prompt well, to evaluate outputs. And if you train on those things, then as the tools change and evolve, the teams can change and evolve with them. And then if you are one of those teams that, you have made it through the startup time, you have actively implemented, and your teams are using the tools, then if you're scaling your AI operations, one of the things we would recommend is really treating your knowledge as infrastructure, because at scale, your success is going to depend on reusable, clean, high value content, because without it, your AI is going to underperform and sometimes perform poorly. And then finally, if you're at that scaling stage, one of the priorities we would encourage you to think about is just building a rhythm that sustains adoption. So for example, setting regular check-ins that allow you to track usage, track user feedback, track the outcomes you're getting, because if you are doing that, you're turning AI from being an interesting project into a true capability. So now let's look ahead. Let's look ahead at what we think we see on the rest of the horizon for 2026. Clearly AI is going to keep evolving. We'll see new models, we'll see new tools, and I feel like, Vishwas, if the last 2 years predict the next 2 years, change will be a constant. Some of the breakthroughs that we'll see are going to be unpredictable. There will be hype. But then there's going to be some things that are probably quietly change everything for us. So, what do you think some of the things on the horizon that we should be paying attention to as we head into the end of 2026 should be?
Amy, absolutely. This slide, in some ways, we've been speaking at these webinars for over a year now. And some of these themes, despite the advent of GPT-5, right? GPT-5 was going to be that AGI thing that everybody was talking about. It would take us to, it could do anything, right? But GPT-5 has come out, definite improvement as we talked about. But it is very clear, at least now, until we talk about some AGI magic in the future, that the success is dependent on the collaboration between human beings and AI. And AI at this current stage, think of this in a partial autonomy model. It's not going to be a full autonomy model, which means there's always going to be collaboration in order to draw value. And writers are becoming more of strategists. So it's important to think about the content plan. How do you want to structure a response, having the vision for that response, and then using AI to maybe convert that vision into words, but then being a very critical reviewer about, did AI get this right? Is this information correct? Going and checking attribution reports. So that collaboration is evolving. So writers' role is evolving as well. But the idea behind human and AI collaboration still stays strong. And the third thing I would say, Amy, going to repeat what you just said, models are changing, prompt engineering best practices are changing, how you store the information, how these models go out and reason, and is that reasoning the right set of reasoning steps for you, or you need to inject your own reasoning steps. That will require continuous adaptation, which means as these models get better, we need to get better. Stay curious, as you said, Amy. Uh, Share within the team what works. We are here. Part of our webinar series has all been about, we want to share what we are seeing in the market, and we would love to hear from you as well. Amy?
Yeah, definitely. And I think just one parting note, just to continue thinking of AI as a partner. I think that the teams and the super users that do that, that allows them to use the technology more successfully, to evolve their own skills a little bit faster, and to just adapt as change requires us to. We would like to leave you with a few resources. For any of you interested in continuing to build your skills, Shipley, we've had our AI training for more than a year now. We've advanced this, so now we have an advanced techniques class that is being incredibly well received. People in the class leave being able to create their own AI assistants and AI agents. So we want to make sure everyone here knows that training is available. Vishwas, I'd love for you to share, some things about what's going on at pWin.ai before we leave.
Yeah, Amy, one thing I'd like to share, we have an exciting program called the 90-day quick pilot program. And there's a very important reason for making this available. As you know, we've been conducting demonstrations, we've been inviting people to test drive the product, and that has been a lot of learning experience for the people who try out the test drive and the feedback that we get, which is very rich. One thing that we've heard from our customers is, great, I've tried the test drive, I've tried to generate content based on all the things that you set up. Now, can I try this on my own content? Can I try this with my own one instance of an RFP? And that's what we are enabling. So quick pilot gets you started. It's a 90-day. We are confident that when you see this working with your content, with your RFP, you'll realize the value, and then you'll be motivated to go to the next steps. So please sign up for, look at the QR code, sign up for a live demo, and if you're interested, sign up for this 90-day quick pilot program, which we are getting really good response about, and would like to see you join that as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We love having the opportunity to share where we are as we get through 2025 with you with AI. We hope that this content was helpful and useful to you, and we would love to talk with you more. Please feel free to reach out to Vishwas about things related to AI, specifically in pWin. Reach out to me if there's anything I can do to be helpful in your AI journey. Okay, well, thanks everyone.